I'm Maria Shamkalin, the Vice Chair of Pennsylvania Film Industry Association, and I'm delighted to welcome Christopher Baffa, who is actually a director of photography on Glee, which is one of my favorite shows, so I have to bring it up. So I'm very excited. But Christopher actually worked on so many other amazing shows like Dominion, Crossbones, Krypton. You just worked on the Disney film, right? The
High School Musical. Yeah.
Yes. So a lot of amazing productions that Christopher worked on, both TV and film, both feature world and television. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you. So we're going to start by asking you how you got started in this industry.
Wow, great first question. I went to film school, University of Southern California. I'd always been fascinated by film, always been very visual, grew up in a very art-loving family. In fact, I own many of the paintings. They're no Rembrandts, but they're paintings that I grew up with that my parents owned. You know, and as a child would remember seeing them and looking at them and being affected by them. And then was fortunate enough, a very dear friend from film school, John Aronson, a very talented cinematographer, got a Roger Corman film that he was shooting, and he called and asked if I wanted to shoot second unit. And I said, absolutely. And that got me in with the Roger Corman world, where I shot a number of feature films, and that sort of was a real jumpstart to my early career. And in those days, we shot on film, we watched dailies projected, which is something that no one does, you know, or very few people do anymore. We had to do answer prints and color and all these stages. Even though they were very low budget films, it was a tremendous training ground because we could do anything we wanted creatively. They used to say it has to have an image, which means it couldn't be too dark, or you know, you couldn't go too crazy, but in terms of style or things you wanted to try, you were left to your own devices. So that was a wonderful extension of film school. And after that, I was in the industry and off and running.
Nice. And just growing up the ladder, project after project.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. What are some important skills and qualities that a director of photography should have? And what was one of the most difficult skills for you to learn?
I think when it comes to skills, I mean, I think if I'm reading the question, it's another great question correctly. I think there's technical skills, but then there's, for lack of a better term, there's social skills. Both are very important. I think the technical skills of how to light a set and how to do all the photographic elements, you know, and exposure and working with the different pieces of equipment, that's one whole side. I think the more interesting answer is the social side, because to me, it all comes down to communication. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able, which to me means not just talking, but also hearing. You have to be able to take in what people are saying and also present your ideas, certainly to your crew, in terms of what it is that we want to achieve, but also with a director planning out a shot or a scene, knowing what he or she wants, listening to that, knowing that that's important, and being able to communicate maybe some of the issues that might be there with that. And also being able to plan ahead and have the right things there, in terms of equipment, perhaps, might be people, certain different, you know, not everybody is on a film set all the time. Depending on the project, you might have a certain artist coming in to do a specific function. And so oftentimes, not oftentimes, but in my career, there's been a couple times when we've looked around and said, well, where is that person? And well, no one told us we needed that. And so it's like, okay, we do need that. So can we call them and get them in? And this might be someone like in science fiction. A lot of times there's a lens technician that puts contact lenses in actors to make them look like werewolves or aliens or whatever. That person's very specialized, and they won't just be on a film set to where you can say, hey, we need a contact lens. It's something that's pre-arranged and can easily slip through the cracks. And so having all those things outlined, but all that comes back to communication. What do we need? what are we trying to create? What are the elements we need to create what it is we're trying to do? And I think that's the primary thing really, is communication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in regards to technical skills?
I think technical, it's a very interesting time in the industry, because I came up in film, and then we all transferred over to this digital wave, which I'm a big fan of, but it was difficult to relearn somewhat how to do what we do. Certain things were the same in terms of how I approached lighting or storytelling, or how I used color, some of the tools of a cinematographer, but how the capture medium of film versus a digital sensor changed the way we did what we did, and how it read that information. And, you know, maybe a colored gel that you would put on a light on film, you knew how the film behaved, whereas in digital you might look and go, okay, that's not that same red that I like. Mm-hmm. And so you would have to then be flexible to say, okay, the sensor's reading it differently, and be able to be flexible yourself and say, okay, well, let's try a different red now that we're in the digital world. I think that, in answer to the previous part of the question, is another thing too. Flexibility is key. Knowing when to throw out your idea because someone else's is better. Mm. And also having that humility to be able to not be too sensitive. That's something I struggle with a lot. I tend to be very overly sensitive, and I know that about myself. And if a director doesn't take your idea, doesn't mean that he or she doesn't respect you, or it just means that at that particular moment, that's not the idea they're looking for. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be flexible. You have to have a certain degree of humility. You've got to be able to think on your feet, because sometimes you're out there and the whole plan changes. Mm-hmm. And I think going back to the technical, that's also something that can happen. You have to know the equipment enough that you feel comfortable that if something changes, you can adapt with it, whether it's in terms of years and technologies changes, or right there on set where suddenly you're in a different scenario than you thought you'd be, and you need to know how to manipulate the camera in a way that it can do what you want it to do, or you're faced with something like shooting a monitor or something that, you know, we had a monitor on set the other day it was a monitor in the shot, not our monitors, and it was doing a little strobing. We had to change the shutter, angle to find the right perfect setting, and we ended up on a very bizarre shutter angle. In film, it was always, there were a couple that usually worked. This was a very specific, strange number that just happened to work. So, you have to be flexible and know. I knew that would probably be a solution, but I didn't think it would take as many times that we tried to get the right shutter angle. So I think it's a lot of that. I think it's flexibility, communication. And then, as I said, the big one for me was always, don't be too sensitive. Don't be upset if somebody didn't like your idea. And I still wrestle with that.
I mean, thank you for being honest about it.
Yeah,
I'm sure many wrestle with that. Yeah. Yeah,
I want to be honest, because I know that that's something that young cinematographers, some of the better questions, I was very impressed with the questions, and some of the ones that I really responded to were ones along this line of don't be afraid that if you're a little sensitive, if you're passionate about your work, you're going to be, mm-hmm. And you should be, but you just have to learn. In answer to this question, you kind of have to learn how to control that and put it aside and not let it interfere, or don't think that, somebody doesn't like you because they didn't take your idea, and all these crazy things we do as human animals. There's a lot of that on a film set because you are doing something artistic. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of energy that goes into it, and there's a lot of passion and mm-hmm. a lot of emotion, and learning how to shut that down sometimes mm-hmm. is one of the biggest skills I think that people who are starting out should learn to develop and eventually master. I'll let you know what that's like when I ever get there, because I don't feel like I'm there yet. But I think it's something to think about right out of the gate, because I know it's something I don't want to say battled, but to a certain degree, you work with different personality types, mm-hmm. And many times there, I remember working with somebody that I thought was, just didn't care for me. And they were just, it turned out that was not the case. They were just they had a very certain style, and their style was a little gruff. And so I kept getting my feelings hurt. And finally I realized, I don't think this is about me. I noticed this person being that way to other crew people.
Yeah.
And I said, I think this is just how this person works. And I tried to take myself out of the equation and just deal with what he was saying. And that worked much better. But it took a moment to stop, pull myself back, evaluate it, and look at it as an adult and say, okay, this isn't about, why am I making this about me? It's really about him, but this is my director. So how can I make this work? And I tried to just be less sensitive and take the information at face value.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Thank you. No, this is great. Thank you. You led us right to the question on collaboration with the director. So what is the key to an effective collaboration with the director?
I think the key to an effective collaboration with any director is, again, communication. Mm-hmm. I think kindness goes a long way. Really being, there can be a lot of negativity on sets. I think, again, sometimes it's not intended maliciously. Mm-hmm. I think that the stakes are very high for people artistically, that sometimes that's what comes out. And I think you really want to work at never being the negative force that your director's encountering. And in thinking about this earlier, I came up with a good example. Let's say a director has an idea for a shot. In the past, when I was starting out, let's say that shot involves the taking out of a wall, which we do on a soundstage all the time. But let's say this wall is a little more complicated. Maybe it has a fireplace or a window in it, makes it heavier, or whatever the reason. In the past, I might have said, before I said, wow, what a great idea, I might have said, okay, we have to pull the wall out. That's not what a director wants to hear at that moment. They want to hear if you like it, first of all. So again, it's taking yourself out of it. We'll get to the wall in a minute. Let's talk about, oh, that's a great idea. And I like that because we can do this, or it's telling this story, or it's reinforcing the emotion you're trying to get, or wow, we can do this nice little camera move that'll be very spooky, or whatever the ambiance you're trying to create. And be honest if you do like it, or you might not like it. And honesty is another part of this quotient. Always be honest. Mm-hmm. But once you've been honest, if you do like it, then you can bring up the wall, but in a non-negative way, not as an obstacle, but just as a matter of fact. So in other words, it's not making it as the cinematographer, your problem, and not making it the director's problem, but a statement of fact. I know that the wall we're talking about pulling out is a little heavier. Hey, how are we doing on time? And maybe the first AD says, guys, we're good with time. Go ahead and pull the wall. Or the first AD says, you know what, we're a little behind. Maybe this is not the time to pull the wall. But let he or she be the bad guy. You know what I mean? Don't make it you. And I don't mean that literally, because I like the idea of a team. But I mean, that is their function, of among many, is having their eye on the clock and helping us to navigate through our time. And so he or she, as the first AD, will always be there to say, I feel like this might hurt us, or I think we're in good shape. The point being, don't be the one to immediately go to the negative of the idea. Embrace the idea and say, that'll be great. I know this wall is a factor. How do we feel about that? Mm-hmm. And the director then can say, oh, you're right. I didn't realize the wall had to move. Let's not do it. Or I really want to do it. I'm not concerned about the wall. And then it's like, great, let's do it. Honesty, as I brought up, I think is really critical. I know a lot of young DPs get in trouble. They say yes to everything. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to contradict what I just said, but you do have to be able to be honest. And I think the key that is that hard line to massage is being honest, but not being that negative influence. Mm-hmm. Making information simply information and not as much of a defense of yourself. In other words, that wall, don't own that wall. It's not your fault that the wall is there. Just present it. I know this wall has to go. Are we okay with that? They might have an idea that you might have other bigger concerns about. And I think there are ways that you do need to express those, but you can do that in a positive way. You can start out first by saying, I love this idea. I'm trying to think of a way to do it. I had a director once say to me, I was thinking about something and he had posed an idea and he said, you don't like the idea. And I said, absolutely not. I actually love the idea and I'm going through in my head how to do it because I know that there's this and this and this that are stopping us. Yeah. And I've solved the first two, but I was in the process of solving the third one. And I joked with many directors that when you see me go blank, it's not a lack of interest. It's actually so much interest that I'm trying to figure it out. You know, and we both laughed at that, but at least that this director knew in that moment that I was on his side. And it ended up being that the concern I had, the third one that I couldn't solve, was a big enough factor, and what it was I don't recall, but I had to be honest and say, we can't get back that far because if we pull the wall, there's a wall behind that, or, you know, I'm being metaphorical, but there was something that didn't allow us to do what he wanted to do. And I had to be the one to say that. And what I ended up saying was, what else do we think we can do that will capture that same idea? Because your idea is great from a storytelling perspective. What's the version of that where the wall doesn't have to go? And then we put our heads together and came up with something. And I think he just felt supported, which is, I think, the key answer to this particular question. Make sure your director feels supported, that you're the one they can come to with an idea. You'll be honest, but you'll be positive, and that you're more than I like to consider. And I've been, one of my greatest compliments is when directors do what I'm about to say, that they feel they can come to you and use you as a confidant and say, you know, I don't know that I'm getting this performance. What do you have any thoughts? Or, you know, do you buy this? I had a director say that once, came over to me pretending that it was a camera thing. He said, hey, you know, let me ask you something, as he was crossing the set. And when he got to me, I thought it was going to be something about the shot. And he said, are you buying this performance? And I said, I am. Yeah. Are you not? And he goes, I don't know. And I love that moment because I was more than a DP in that moment. Yeah. I was a collaborator. And so you want to be that. You want to be somebody that they can come to and they can console. Maybe they come and say, oh, I just got spanked by the producers because we went a little long last night, you know, or whatever it is. They can be you can be their partner in crime on an emotional level, as well as doing your job as a cinematographer.
Yeah. Thank you. This is a great skill to learn. I mean, I think
Yes.
on different sides of production, this
All sides.
personal approach. Yeah. How much creative freedom do directors of photography have?
I found that question very interesting because I was really trying to, because I made some notes, and the hard part, and I hate to ever answer a question like this, but I'm going to. It depends. What I mean by that is it'll be every different project will have a different level of creative freedom. And it might even come down to every different director will have a different sense of creative, or will allow you a different sense of creative freedom. Most of the time, a director of photography has a great deal of creative freedom. Up until we get to the really big obstacles of budget, where you just don't have the money to do what you want to do. Time, the schedule. It might be the gear that you don't have. It might be people that you don't have. And that's where you have to be honest, not only with your director, but you have to be honest with yourself. And there's a question coming up about cognitive dissonance, that's a very real struggle. Yeah. Is knowing what you're able to do as a contrast to what it is you really want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of this question. Mm-hmm. is that connection between those two issues, that sort of struggle within you.
Then we're going to add the cognitive dissonance question into this one. how do you deal with it and with all the decision making and wishing to have more creative freedom? How does that all work together then?
It's a great combo question. So I think for me, it's a source of difficulty. I'm not going to lie. Again, wanting to, especially for the young starting cinematographers out there, be as honest as I can and give information that I think will help you. And it's okay to feel frustrated. That's why I love that question so much, both of these questions, and I love that we've combined them, because your creativity is going to be a product of more than just your own creativity. If you're doing an oil painting in your living room, your creativity is not, I guess the only thing you have to deal with is, did I run out of a paint color that I want? But barring that, you don't have any limits. There are no parameters to your creativity. On a film set, you do, because you might not have the time. You might have a great idea, but man, that's going to take an hour that we don't have. Or it might be that that would take equipment that we don't have. And so you're facing that a million times a day. And so for me, what I try and do is just weigh it, and I've gotten better, but it's been a struggle. I've gotten better at being able to weigh it and just come to that realization sooner and not fight it as much as I used to when I was starting out, to know that it isn't my fault. Mm-hmm. It's no one's fault. You don't have that piece of equipment. Maybe you didn't know this idea was going to be coming, or you just don't have the time. It might be simply that you're maybe running a little behind, or you have too much work to do. And as brilliant as the idea is, you don't have the resources to pull it off. And so there are a bunch of little mini compromises that have to be made throughout the day. And that just becomes this giant weighing process. And a lot of times, going back to our director and our collaborative relationship that we hopefully have, you and he or she are often standing there having this exact conversation. They might love your idea. Well, how long will it take? Well, what if we go quicker in the next scene? Can we spend a little more time here? And well, if you're willing to do that, yeah, I see the other scene is just 2 shots. Let's do your idea and do that lighting thing, or let's set up that elaborate camera move that will really tell the story we're trying to tell. So sometimes it's not me alone. Oftentimes it's not me alone, but as a cinematographer, oftentimes it is. It's looking at a setting going, I know what I would do if I was painting in my living room, but I'm not. And so let's do this instead. And that can be very painful, but that's also part of it that I think I would say to the young cinematographers is that pain's okay. And it's a point you're going to need to get to function in the industry. And so learning how to have it not want to go home every night and slit your wrists artistically, being able to not accept it necessarily. It's difficult to put into words, but understand and respect it as a parameter that you don't really have any control over. And when you get to the point where you can have a certain understanding and respect for that, it becomes less daunting, I guess.
Whom does your department consist of, and what is the key to effective and productive collaboration within the department?
As a director of photography, we are in charge of 3 different departments, and I consider them the 3 tripod legs that hold up the whole team, and that's grip, electric, and of course camera. Each of those has set personnels and positions. The camera department is a director of photography, an A camera operator, and a B camera operator. If you have 2 cameras, a first AC, a second AC, a data wrangler, used to be a loader, oftentimes a digital imaging technician. There might be playback personnel. The actual personnel and positions alters slightly. And then the grip electric departments have the gaffer and Best Boy electric, and then all of the other electrics. And then the grip side has the key grip, Best Boy grip, and all of the grips. And that involves a lot of other positions in there. There'll be dolly grips. And if you're working overseas in Europe, it's very different. Those positions have different functionality than they do in America. So that's always an interesting experience. But I think the way that you work with that team is many of the things we've discussed. You know, communication is key, letting people know what it is we're going to be facing, what it is we're trying to do creatively. You know, I sometimes will want to talk specifically about how something's going to be done. I've gotten better at not doing that. I think sometimes it's better to pass on what it is you want to see and let those people do what they do. And just say, if you have any issues, please let me know, but here's what we'd like to see happen. Because they're all, you know, artists in and of themselves. And when you have a good crew, like you know, always been blessed to have, they're people that do care and they're very passionate themselves and they want to have everything be the best it can be. And so many times you just have to express to them, and then also be open, again, that second side of communication, not just telling people, well, I want to see this, this, and this. It's being able to hear their concerns, or as I said earlier, even though the director doesn't want you to be negative when you're talking about that wall that's in the way, they do need to know about that if it's an impediment. I also, as a good cinematographer, have to know about, well, I want to do this with light. I need to know if that's an issue. Well, we can't get that as high as you want because the ceiling, and, oh, okay, well, what do you guys recommend? And a lot of times it'll be the kind of thing that me and my teams will talk about in a very open-ended, you know, sort of conversational way, because they're the ones that have to physically make it happen. And so you want to be able to express it really clearly, or know the times when it's not all that clear. I'm thinking of something like this, but you guys tell me, what do you think we can do with the space we have? They might have a great idea, or it might be you that has the great idea as the cinematographer going, you know, I have a really great idea. I've done this before. I know we're short on time. If we can do X, Y, Z, it'll be great. And they say, okay, great. But be open to them saying, okay, the only problem, hold on a second, is we don't have that gear, or, you know, we have that gear, but we're using it in the other part of the set. Okay, all right. So what can we do? So it's very communicational. Planning, letting people know what's coming up is really critical to the overall speed of working, which is unfortunately in this business. You know, it's the motion picture industry. And so art oftentimes, you know, art can be achieved, but you also have to make the proverbial day. And so there are a lot of people who are watching the clock and wondering, how are we doing? And so anytime that you can make something that's complicated less complicated by getting a jump on it, it might be going in the night before and saying, hey, tomorrow I want to pull some of these ceiling tiles out. Okay, well, we'll have them do that overnight. Whatever it is, people can't really do anything ahead unless they know what the plan is. It might be that wall we talked about. If we had that discussion, not about the scene we're doing, but a scene we're doing later in the day, well, then there's plenty of time to pull that heavy wall. You just tell them, hey, while we're over in this set, can you guys please have this wall pulled? Great. Then when we go in, we get to do that director's brilliant shot. So the other thing, the key element that I really want to address that I think can sometimes be difficult for newer cinematographers is to always lead through respect. There tends to, I think, sometimes be, because you are a very powerful position. And I certainly, when I was coming up, worked with some people that were less than pleasant, let's be kind. And it was difficult. And what it taught me was, you want to lead people through inspiration. You want to have them feel like they're part of a team, that they're contributing, that they're valuable. You don't want people doing things out of intimidation or fear, or, you know, and nowadays I think it's great that we're in this Me Too movement. We're in this hyper sensitive sort of world that I think we're going to find will settle down a little bit in the coming years. But for right now, I'm actually okay that everybody's on really good behavior on a set, because it's a nice sort of change in that you can't get away with some of the things that cinematographers did 20 or 30 years ago, where there was yelling and, you know, people said derogatory things to people. That doesn't fly anymore. And nowadays you can literally be sued for it. So not only do I believe in it as a human, it's counterproductive as a cinematographer, because nobody's going to want to help you achieve your vision if they feel that you're saying things that are derogatory, or you're treating them with no respect whatsoever. My father was a Superior Court judge. He was a very powerful man, and he treated anybody we ever came in contact with exactly the same. Mm-hmm. It could be the waiter at the restaurant, it could be the person checking us out at the supermarket, or it could be the mayor of Los Angeles. Everybody from him got the exact same treatment. I've tried to adopt that, because as a DP, you are very powerful, mm-hmm. and it's easy for that power to be corrupted a little and to get, you know, abusive at times. And I think that's something that is not a good thing. I'm very against that. And so try and lead your teams through that respect for them. Most of the time, people want to help. And if they are just given the feeling that they're valuable and have a contribution to make, they're going to perform even better. And you're going to get a better product. And it's going to be a nicer environment. You're on a film set for a long time every day. So you don't want it to be a place where you or anyone else feels, you know, less than accepted and appreciated. And it should be fun. I go out of my way to do fun. I do a lot of comedy with my walkie. I always pick up and say, you know, can we call the police, please? This person's, you know, or whatever it is. And as silly as it'll be, you know, a lot of times the crew loves it, because it's a sense of, well, this is the boss, but they also know they can come and say, hey, I know this is a great plan we had. We just ran into a snag. And I'll be like, okay, well, let's see what the snag is. We'll figure it out, instead of them being terrified. Well, if we tell him, he's going to start screaming at everybody. You know, you don't want that. So those are the key components: grip, electric camera. And I think the biggest principle in this question is just making sure that you're respecting everybody as a human being. I mean, I'd like to see us all do more of that in just the world in general, but certainly when you're on a soundstage, you know, COVID's made things a little different, but you're around a lot of people a lot of time, you know, for a lot of time. And if there's not grace and civility, then it can be a really uncomfortable world, and there's just no reason for it.
100%. Every set has its own aura, and that aura depends on the people who are in charge and how they create it. Whether you come to that set and you're happy, or whether you feel like you're in a very difficult long work day, and that's up to the leaders to establish that.
I think that's true. Yeah, and I think it's okay if you have a rough moment, or you have a down moment, or you're frustrated because something didn't work. Yeah. But I think what you just said is so critical. You have to be aware that in this role, or the role of a director or a producer, you know, you are somebody that the crew will look to as a barometer for, okay, are we screwed here? Are we going to be able to do this scene? Is this movie going to be good? Is the scene going to be good? You know, is this going to be a 20-hour day with all of us standing around in the mud? You know, but if you're out there with them in the mud and you have a smile on your face, then suddenly they feel like, well, okay, you know, he's got all the pressure on him, or she's got all the pressure on her as the DP, and, you know, he or she's smiling, so I can do this. And I think what you just said is the heart of it. They will look, the tone of a set is something that trickles down, I think, a lot of times. And so anybody that's on the higher part of that waterfall is responsible for that tone. And I think that's a very important point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
How do you choose which projects you want to take upon?
The choice of a project, obviously, you know, you want to read something and be moved by it or affected by it emotionally. You want to have it spark your imagination. I know if I'm reading something and I'm already thinking of the visual side of this world, that's a good element. But it's also the people, kind of going back to what we were just talking about. You know, I'm interested in the collaborations a lot of times. And I think I was photographing Nip Tuck. I think it was Nip Tuck. Yes, it was. And one of our producers came up to me, he was also one of our directors. And he said, you know, how you doing? Are you okay? We were close to the end of the season. And I said, yeah. And he goes, are you tired? And I said, I'm okay. Why? And he said, are you so tired you wouldn't be able to do a pilot? And I said, no, I'm not that tired. And he said, okay, I'll send you a script. And I said, is this something you're doing? And he said, yes, I'm going to direct. And I said, I don't need to read the script. And I meant that. Wow. If he was involved, I want to be involved. There are a few people like that. That's not everyone I've encountered, but I'm lucky that I've had, relationships like that I truly value. And this producer director is one without question that, I was interested in reading the script, but I basically accepted the project based on the fact that he was doing it and wanted me to do it.
Wow.
Done, I'm in. So it can be the script, of course, but it also can be the people that you're knowing you're going to be involved in. And it might be producers, it might be directors. A lot of times I'm able to bring in, the crew. So the people that work with me are, depending on where I am, something that I have control over. But the people that are hiring me, you always want to have that sense of being appreciated and everybody loves to be loved and wanted. And so there are people out there like this person that I definitely, and he was very funny. He sort of made a point of saying, well, no, I want you to read the script and make sure it's something you want to do. And I said, okay, sure, if that makes you feel better, but if you are wanting to know if I'm in, I'm in. And I really love that, So I think it's both. I think it's the material. The material does want to speak to you. I would not want to shoot something that I didn't feel passionate about. Now, to all the young cinematographers out there, again, with our honesty clause that we've started here today, you're going to shoot things you're not going to be passionate about. I've done it.
Yeah.
The goal or the journey is to get to a point where you don't have to do that. In the beginning, shoot whatever you can and learn something from it. And so I might do something just because there's one element that deals with an area that I consider myself to be lesser educated in. It might be a subject matter. It might be shooting in a place that I've never shot, that I feel is important, that I have that experience. So there are other factors, but really, I think it comes down to the material and then the people involved. And when you're starting out, unfortunately, it's not always going to be those two things. It might be that somebody's willing to pay you and you need the job, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, even if you're doing a horrible, badly written, low budget horror movie, you can still go in there each day and say, I'm going to try and do my job really well. Or more importantly, I'm going to learn everything I can today that will propel me to tomorrow, and tomorrow will propel me to next week. And every day builds on itself like a brick in the wall. And so there is no bad experience, even if it's a horrible film and you had a horrible time on it. You learn something that, whether you're aware of it or not, you're applying to the next thing. And I think that's the goal, is to get to that point where, in answer to your question, who are the people involved and how do I feel about the material?
Thank you. And you brought up education. So what are some ways for directors of photography who are already working directors of photography, but at the beginning of their path, what is the way for them to continue their professional development in terms of learning new techniques, new approaches, when they're already leading on set, but want to learn new ways?
Right. I think that's a great question. I think cinematographers are very generous people. They like to talk about, as you can tell by how much I'm rambling, we like to talk about what we do. We're very passionate about it. And I don't think I've met a cinematographer yet where I've said, hey, I really loved what you did in blah, blah, blah. What was that camera thing you were using? And have somebody say, that's my secret, and walk away. Usually it's the opposite. It'll be an hour-long diatribe of, oh, I'm glad you noticed that. What I did was, and it's this wonderful sort of sharing environment. You know, most of the time, I'm sure there's exceptions, but I can honestly say personally, I don't know that I've ever experienced it. And when I became a member of the American Society of Cinematographers, which was a huge honor, and I started to be at functions, ASC functions, where I was talking to very big cinematographers, I found the same process happened. Oscar-winning cinematographers, and I would, wow, I noticed this. You noticed that? Oh my God, nobody notices that. Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to do that. And I'd say, why? What did that mean? Oh, well, here's what it meant. And there's this incredible energy. So I would say, talk to as many cinematographers as you can. I know the ASC has a bunch of open house events a lot of times. You know, again, with COVID, things are different, but usually the ASC awards are a big, really wonderful celebration. And, you know, I would recommend going to that every year.
Are they open to non-members, those who haven't had the honor yet?
You can go as a non-member. Yeah, you can go. And there's usually an open house. I think it's the Saturday before where anyone can go. And it's at the clubhouse and you can mingle with people and we wear our little name tags and people can go, oh, I'm a fan of such and such. And so it's that if you're a working cinematographer, visit other cinematographers and see what their set is like. I think you learn a couple things there. You learn some technical things. You know, you go visit your friend and he or she's using a type of equipment you've never used. You get to, you know, your friend is somebody you can go up to and say, okay, how does this work? I've never used this. But also you might see the way that he or she talks to his or her crew that you go, wow, I love the way that they're communicating. I don't think I'm that good at communicating. I don't think I tell them everything that they just said. Or it might be the opposite. Like, wow, I really am much nicer to my crew than my friend. You know, you're going to learn something from that experience. So talk to cinematographers, visit people's sets. You know, I was shooting Glee on the Paramount lot, and this is a few years ago. And we had a stage that we had a giant set on that we ended up taking down. And when we took that set down, that stage became open. And I saw one day, I went outside the soundstage to go to the restroom, and I saw the big doors open and set pieces were being brought in. And so I asked some of my crew, you know, what's going on across the alley? And they said, we don't know. I said, well, somebody go find out. And next thing I know, it was a Tom Hanks film that the great Philippe Rousselot, who's a brilliant cinematographer, somebody that I had always looked up to, was shooting for Mr. Hanks. And so through the ASC, I'm allowed to have email and telephone access to other members. And I've used that only, I think, twice. I try. It's one of those things I don't want to overuse. Sure. But this was one time where I attained Mr. Rousselot's email. I sent him an email. I said, I'm shooting Glee across the alley from you. I would love to come and meet you if that's acceptable, or you can come to, you know, it's sort of like a neighborhood. I can come to your stage or you can come to mine, or we can meet in the alley. And he wrote back a lovely, you know, email. He's a lovely, lovely man. And I went over and spent a little time on his set and watching the way that he does. I'd seen his films, River Runs Through It. I mean, Dangerous Liaisons, you name it. He's a master cinematographer, but watching how he did things was the most educational. You know, I can look at his films and oftentimes know where the light is coming from and how he's doing things. Not something I could do. I think he's a master lighter. But a lot of times I'm aware of, okay, there's light coming in that window and I can figure it out, even if I'm rewinding and watching a shot, you know, 50 million times. Wait, where is that light coming? Oh, I see. He put it over the set wall. Okay. But how he communicated and his elegance and his manner and all of those things were incredibly valuable. And so I think if young cinematographers can be open to allowing themselves, this goes back to that ego thing, the humility. Don't be afraid to go and learn. Don't be afraid to reach out to people and say, hey, can I come and visit your set? You know, or like I said, I was literally next door. His stage was we were in 14 and 15 and he was in 16. It's like, I'm asking if I can cross the alley. Of course he said yes, because he's a very kind man. But it might be that simple, or it might be something where somebody says, look, I'm willing to drive the 20 miles to your set. Can I come visit? Some people will say no. Most people will say yes. Reading American Cinematographer. You know, sometimes people say, well, that's hokey. There's no good information in that. There's tons of information. You know, that's what it's for. And I've been blessed to be in the magazine. You know, Stephen Pizzello is the editor, is a dear friend and is an amazing man. He's a huge fan of cinematography. And I think one of the goals he's had is to do exactly what you're asking about, is to provide a resource for young people to go and read. Well, how did Chris Baffa do blah, blah, blah? Well, if I'm in the magazine that month, hopefully that I'm talking about it, you know, and I've read the magazine going, oh, that's why that was that way. Now I see what they did. So I think that's a huge thing. And then the other thing is to watch as much as possible. Watch whatever you can. Not just films you're interested in or TV shows you're interested in. You know, what is the show your wife's hooked on? A lot of times that's what determines what we're watching. You know, I'll come home and my wife will say, oh, I'm binge watching this show. And I'll go, okay, let me see. How's it shot? You know, and I might not like the show, but I might be really intrigued. She said just the other night, we were watching something and she said, you know, I want to do another episode. Are you up for that? And I'd say, I'm not a big fan of the show, but I can't wait to see what this cinematographer did, you know, in the next episode, because I love, you know, his or her work. I hadn't seen the credit yet. So embracing all of the material out there in terms of what people are doing technically, but also creatively. And then there's always a way to backtrack around to the technical. And it might be that you run into somebody who worked with Roger Deakins on something and you could say, oh my God, thank God, I've been dying to know, how did you guys do that shot where? And like I said, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have somebody who's not only, you know, willing, is excited to say, oh, it was awesome, we did, and they'll go into it. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought it up, that you can actually reach out to people and they're happy to talk to you, because after watching a show or a film that you're really inspired by, you can find almost anybody on IMDb Pro and then just ask and talk, and people are happy to respond, like you said. So I'm glad you brought it up. I hope.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I hope that those who are watching will take advantage of the human connection
that
everybody's seeking.
It's the best way to learn, and it's something that, you know, sometimes it's a specific question that I've asked cinematographers. Other times it's a broader, you know, like some of the questions you sent me. Sometimes it's, you know, okay, Mr. Deakins, how do you prep for something? You know, and the answers are always very educational.
And that takes us to, how do you prep for something? So
well, you're good at this.
Yeah. So how do you, when you get the project, how do you prepare? How does your pre-production, what does your pre-production look like? What's the process?
I love to take a script on any project that I'm prepping and examine it in the same way that an actor might, in terms of what I call the arc. You can have a character arc. They start bad, let's say, and they end up, you know, redeeming themselves and they're a good person by the end. That's very simplistic, but for the purposes of discussion. So I believe that there's an equal visual arc there. And I try and dissect the script in those ways. What is it that we're starting in, and where are we ending, and what does the journey between the two look like? To an actor, it might be, you know, and you would know better than I, but, you know, what does it feel like, or what emotional stages will I go through to get to that redemption of my character? I'm kind of playing the same game, but on the visual side. What stages of visual progression can get me from the beginning to where we're trying to go? And so that's the prep that I do on my own. A lot of times prep is location scouting and coming back again to communicating, having a lot of conversations. What are we trying to do? What are we able to do? What is our goal here? It might be, what are we building with respect to sets, planning specific things. But for me, the really interesting work is sitting down with just the script and myself and trying to find those emotional beats in the same way that an actor would, if he or she were reading what happens to their character, and finding ways to interpret that photographically or reinforce an idea. If it's very dramatic, or if it's very somber, finding a way that the light reinforces that notion and helps build that mood and tone. And it should never work against it. I don't believe in heavy-handed cinematography. I think it has its place in certain movies that have very powerful looks, and that works for certain types of films. But I think most of the time we want our work to be more invisible. We want it to be felt more than it is seen, which sounds contradictory, because we of course want it to be seen. But what I mean by that is we want it to be in service to the story and the characters first, not just, someone once said, so I won't take credit for this, having something be properly lit doesn't always mean that it's beautifully lit, or I'm paraphrasing, and I like that, because I think another thing to young cinematographers is we try and have every single shot be beautiful. Well, one of the things you learn is that as you progress, if you're really being truthful to the story, and you're telling a story, let's say, of a very impoverished person in a very nasty part of town, their little one-room apartment that they live in with a hot plate and a neon sign that's coming in their window in an annoying way, that's not necessarily a place that should look beautiful. It should reflect the visual sensibilities of the character's perception, which is, this place is horrible. How do I get out of this? How do I get out of this life? And so I think that discipline of being able to know the difference is something to aspire to. But I think you have to understand the story being told to understand that aspiration. And that's the exciting part for me, is sitting down with the script and trying to identify each of those little aspirational moments, and really try and figure out what's the truthful way to replicate this. What's the right way? And it may not be that it's beautiful. How can I reinforce this somberness? Obviously, if you're doing a romantic comedy or something, then it all can be beautiful and happy, and there can be sunlight everywhere. But if you're doing a story that's more emotional, what can I do that tracks that emotional journey in a way that sort of reinforces that journey that the actors and the director and the writer, have gone on and are going on. And that's the most exciting thing for me about prep, because everything is possible.
Wow.
Everything's achievable. It's only when you get into production when you have those moments where I go off into the corner and cry for a minute, and then I come back and say, okay, I'm good. Let's carry on. Because if you can't bring to fruition something that you thought about in that moment where it was just you and the script, that can be very painful. But again, speaking to the young cinematographers out there, that pain is okay. You didn't do anything wrong. You still did the process right. You still had that great idea. You still had that element that if you had the time or the money to do, or it might be that the director doesn't care for it. No, I don't like that idea. I don't want to do that. And you're like, oh my God, but it was brilliant. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's part of it as well, as we've discussed, is being able to take that reality and say, okay, well, I thought it worked, but we're not going to do that. But it still means you had the idea. You still did your job in terms of sitting down and coming up with visual iconography and visual elements that are trying to, again, I guess in closing, really follow that character and story arc with its own little visual arc, I guess.
And is it up to you during prep to decide the frames, the close-ups, or however you're going about it, or is that director deciding that and you following that vision? How does that collaboration part work in prep?
It'll depend on the project. It'll depend on the director. I've done projects with directors who were not very technical and didn't really have aspirations to be. They were more interested in the words and the emotion. And I had one director, I did a number of films early in my career, and he would say things like, I think they should be in the same frame at this moment emotionally, or I think they should definitely not be in the same frame at this moment. But what that frame was, I don't want to say he didn't care, because he cared, but he trusted me for that part of it, all the photographic, and we would block things, and he would have an idea, or an actor would have an idea, and he would turn to me very respectfully, and I'd say, that's probably not, we think it's going to rain later, so going over to the windows, maybe not great. Plus I'm going to have a big 18K lighting through the window. And okay, what if she goes to the fireplace? Yeah, better, and we figure it out. But a lot of it was that he was more interested in the emotion of it, and in the words and the story. The photography was something that he just wasn't as interested in. It sounds strange for a film director. Others will come in and have very specific plans, and that's fine. It sometimes is not as rewarding, because then my contribution is just less. In the previous example, going back to the earlier question of how much creative freedom does a director of photography have, with this person, I had total creative freedom, because he was leaving the composition, the light. He would comment on things, of course, but very seldomly. He sort of trusted that I had that side of it, and he would deal with the actors and performance, and we worked very well like that. It's okay if somebody comes in contrast and has everything planned out tooth and nail. That's fine too. It just, again, as a cinematographer, you want to feel like you can contribute, but that's also something that you have to deal with in this industry, is that you might be in that position where somebody comes in and has it all laid out, and then you have to find a way to contribute within that parameter. That, okay, they know they want to be on this lens and they want to dolly from here to here, but what can I do now that we've set that up? Maybe we go through some foreground that I can control, or maybe I can, many directors have been very shot savvy. I want this shot, it starts here, it goes to here, and it ends up on this composition. Okay, what about the lighting? You can light it however you want it. I just want this shot. It's like, okay, great. So I'll contribute in the lighting. And so in prep, going to your really wonderful question, that's always going to be a factor of, that's what I mean by it depends. I don't mean that as in an escapism way. But it comes down to the director and his or her desires to be involved in those things, or their visual sense, or the relationship that maybe you've already achieved. There are directors that I know have a very strong interest in the visuals, but if they're working with me, there's a trust there. And that's nice, because they say, oh, by the way, I was thinking of this kind of thing, but set up something cool. I know it's going to be great. So there's different variations of the role in prep, as there are different variations of that relationship on set. Sometimes directors are very heavy-handed in the technical, other times not so much so, and both are great.
Yeah. I'm still going to continue elaborating on this question. With the screenwriters, there's a tendency, especially with the newer screenwriters, where they describe everything. And now we see a close-up of this character, and now it zooms out from here and shows her shoes, and da-da-da-da-da. So you don't think they should be including all these details, because it would be easier for you to do your job without all these details that screenwriters are putting into their script?
That's an extremely interesting question. Thank you for that. I hark back to a moment in film school where, as part of USC's production program, I specialized in cinematography, but we had to take classes in everything, sound, editing, and I took, one of my classes was screenwriting. Our professor at the time had a real issue with that. And he even said, I remember one day, he was a very funny man, but he said, to use your words, cut to the shoes. He said, you're not the editor. You're not the director. Don't put that in. That's none of your business. Yeah. I think there's a point to be made there, but my view of a script is this. Anything that can help me get inside your head as the screenwriter is valuable.
Okay.
And I think any good director would say the same thing, that I don't know that I'm going to cut to those shoes. I don't know that I'm going to ask Chris to help me set up a shot of those shoes. Mm-hmm. But the fact that you're denoting that there's an importance there, there's a significance there, means it's something I should think about. Mm. So I don't mind it being in there. It's really up to the director whether or not we follow that. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, I've heard directors, want to be pretty respectful of the wording, mm-hmm. and I've seen scripts. It comes down to that thing we were just talking about DPs and directors. Mm-hmm. Every relationship's different. Every writer is different. Some tend to put a lot of things and a lot of stage direction. Others don't put any, knowing that it's going to be probably changed anyway. Again, I don't look at it negatively, like my instructor kind of was like, no, don't do this. No, if it gives me an insight as to what's important, yeah, or what you think is adding to a scene, sometimes just the fact that they're saying some type of specific camera move or something. Mm-hmm. There have been times when I thought, that's actually a great idea. Moving into those shoes where we see that there's some blood on the shoe, that, that's a wonderful little clue. So I think it all comes down to the direct, as far as my role, it comes down to the director's interpretation of what he or she feels is important with respect to what we do or don't follow. Yeah. There have been times when I've read screen direction that I thought was so interesting that I've said, are we going to do this? Because it's pretty cool. And, sometimes it's, oh yeah, that writer nailed that. It's a great idea. Other times, like, no, we're not gonna do that. I have another idea. It's like, okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you. And last part of the prep question, I promise.
That's great.
For the storyboard, since, like you said, some directors are very hands-on on every angle how they want it, but some are more about emotions on screen. So who is responsible for the storyboard officially?
The director is officially responsible. Now that can be done in concert with the cinematographer, the director of photography, which I always think is a good idea. And you answered the question in your beautiful asking of the question. I think it comes down to that director. Do they want to be, you hear a lot of talk about, I want to be open to the magic that happens on set. Yeah. I totally agree with that, because sometimes you'll have an idea of what you think something is, and the actors will come in and it'll be something else, and you'll go, wow, I didn't see it that way. Yeah. It might be how they play it. It might be that I remember talking to a director and I said, what do you think's going to happen? He goes, I think they're going to be all over the place. It was a conversation that was awkward. And he said, I think both women are going to be moving around. And I said, okay. And I was just talking to my crew about, okay, we think they're not going to be planted. And they came in and they sat on a couch just to read the lines. This director always said, let's just read it and then we'll put it on its feet, which was his vernacular for, then we'll block it and talk about staging, but let's just read it. And he had them read it, and they did this reading. And at the end of it, he said, I don't know how you ladies feel, but I love that you're just sitting on a couch having this conversation. Yeah. And they said, we didn't think of it that way. We had a plan to move all around just like he thought. Yeah. But we loved the simplicity, and it allowed us to really connect. Mm-hmm. Totally changed everything in a good way. So I think when it comes down to something like storyboards, usually where they're very effective is if you have elements that are I don't want to say dangerous, but in the production world could be a danger with respect to budget or schedule. If you have visual effects, it's a way of guiding everybody that, guys, this is what we're doing right now. It's this shot, it's composed in some version like this, and there are good and bad storyboard artists, just like every position. Right. The good ones really capture a spirit of the shot. Yeah. And it'll be a way of showing people this is what we're seeing. Camera, you're over there, low. You're looking this way. The green screen's there. This is going to cut to this, and it's going to cut to this. These are the 3 visual effects shots we need to sell this gag. Mm-hmm. And so then everybody can be on the same page, and it's right there, in a very visual form. Mm-hmm. Is that always necessary? No, not necessarily. If a director has it really planned out in his or her mind that I need these 3 pieces, and I know what those pieces are, and I've talked to Chris about what the visual effects requirements are to achieve those, the director or myself might just make a brief, hey guys, in this scene, there's going to be about 10 shots, 3 are visual effects shots. So at that time, we're going to be putting a green screen in the living room, and we're going to take a minute and light it, and we're going to shoot these elements. Then we're going to pull that out, and you just walk people through it. Yeah. I feel like it's a very good tool if there are questions, and it might be, again, budget and scheduling questions. If there are stunt questions, if you storyboard a sequence, it gives everybody an idea what the director has in his or her mind, what they think the sequence is. Is it a bunch of moving cameras? Is it one wide shot that never changes? How are you thinking of covering and shooting this particular sequence? Because there's a lot of people that need to know that to have the right gear that day.
Yeah.
And so I like when storyboards are being done to be able to be there, or at least have an input, to be able to, because sometimes if we end up following the storyboards very closely and I wasn't involved, I might not be able to tweak that later. In other words, the storyboards might be, and I've seen storyboards that we followed to the letter, and therefore I can't add something. I can't say, well, can we see all the way to there? That would be great. Well, no, because that's where all the visual effects stuff is, and we don't want to see that because we're trying to save on green screen costs. So we're going to see what's in the storyboard. And I find myself going, I wish I'd been there so I could have said, can we widen this out, or whatever the issue. Yeah. So it's kind of like everything. It'll be differently done with different people and different circumstances.
Makes sense. Thank you. That was a lot of answers to the prep part. Thank you.
That's a good question, though. Prep's important. I like that. All those questions.
Thank you. Do you have a favorite genre to work on? And do you think that aspiring cinematographers should stick to a certain genre as they are starting out?
Another amazing question. And thank you to anybody that sent in a question, because these are really great. I think that I'm drawn to a slightly darker world in terms of things that I like to light and photograph. So I'm a little more of a fan of drama. And that can come in any form. It could be a Western. I mean, it could be, a suspense thriller. It could be, a straight family domestic drama. But I think I lean a little bit more in a dramatic direction. And so in terms of my visual sensibilities, but I think the second part of the question is very relevant, in that my answer to that is, we as cinematographers, I think, and as storytellers, have to be able to address any genre. And I know for a while there was this thing of, if someone hadn't done a particular genre, they oftentimes weren't given the chance. And I think that there's a mistake there, because I think people can learn about, let's say you're being asked to do a Western. You say, well, I've never done a Western. You can study the great Westerns, and there are certain iconographic moments, and there are certain shots, even, the classic gunfight, in the dusty street. There are things that we as fans of cinema probably know more than we realize we do. And that can be learned or acquired during that prep process. You can say, okay, I'm going to watch every Western. I'm going to Google John Wayne, and I'm going to get every film he ever did, and, educate myself. But I think the trick is that there has to be a chameleon-like quality that allows you to do whatever genre, especially when you're starting out, simply so that you can work. Mm-hmm. There's a big part of being a cinematographer, as I think I tried to allude to earlier, in my humble opinion, where every day leads to the next day, and that becomes a year, and that becomes 5 years, and then a decade, and every experience, even if it's a project that you look back and say, I hated that film, the director was mean, it was cold, whatever, you still learned more than you realize. And so I think sometimes doing a genre that maybe you're scared of or intimidated by is exactly the right thing to do artistically, because maybe you need to put yourself in a place where you're not falling back on your normal tricks. Like I said, I like to light dramatic things. Mm-hmm. I've also done very high key comedy in my career, and that's been interesting too. It's a different approach, and is it as artistically rewarding? On some level, probably not, but I'm still trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to make the image compelling and interesting, and it might be a little brighter, it might be a little sunnier, or whatever it is, but I'm still trying to make the photography do all those things we've talked about today, reinforce characters and themes and the overall, trajectory, the arc of the story itself, and all of those things still apply. So you're still being a cinematographer. You're just doing something that's maybe not what you would be drawn to in a more passionate way. And I think the danger is that there's two dangers. One, if you become too comfortable, I think the work starts to suffer, because you're sort of re-experiencing the same kinds of worlds. And secondly, you don't want to become typecast in the same way that an actor does, as you and I were talking earlier. Not every Russian woman has to be the Soviet spy. Yeah. And so not every cinematographer who happens to shoot 3 comedies in the beginning of his or her career, well, they shouldn't be labeled as the comedy person. Mm-hmm. They're probably very capable of drama. And in fact, they might be the one who's like, please give me a drama. I'm over comedy. Can they do it? Of course they can. I was told by a producer once, sitting in the meeting, and he said, he goes, I've loved meeting you. You seem great. Your work is great, but I don't see my project in your material. And so I don't think you're the one for the job. And I said, figuring, okay, I don't have this job, so I might as well be honest. And I said very respectfully, but as I started to get up, I said, wow, that seems like I'd be the exact person you would want to hire. But okay, thank you for your time. And he said, whoa, wait a minute. What do you mean by that? And I said, well, any cinematographer doesn't want to have you say, oh, I loved Glee, I want you to do exactly what you did on that. Or I loved Krypton. I want it to look just like that with no changes. Well, I've already done that. Yeah. So, and he was just floored. He said, how many cinematographers feel this way? And I said, I'm going to go out on a limb and say all of us. And I think that that's true. Nobody wants to do something they've already done. I can say to myself, or somebody can say to me, there are elements of Krypton I think apply to this project. There are certain parts of Glee that I think we could incorporate in a good way. Okay, fine. In the same way that Leonardo da Vinci probably had a certain red that he liked, that he would incorporate into different paintings. Sometimes it was brighter, sometimes it was darker maybe, but he still might use that same red. There are techniques that might work, and there are things that might have been successful in those projects you can incorporate, but you're not just redoing that project. And so I think that comes down to it too, is you don't want to get typecast, and you don't want to be in something that isn't what really motivates you. And yet, again, along with the theme we have today of when you're just starting out, you sometimes will have to shoot something that's totally not your cup of tea visually. And you just have to go in and say, it's a paying job. It's going to get me experience. I'm going to meet people, and I'm going to go in and make this the best blank that I can make it. Because you should be able to do, as a storyteller, you should be able to address any genre and do what you do and break it down the same way as we've discussed in terms of prep, how you are on set, all of those things, you're still doing the same job. It just might have a slightly different look when it's completed.
Wow, thank you. Interesting.
Yeah.
What is some of your favorite equipment to work with? And what are some interesting tricks that you possibly learned that you can share?
I know there was a specific question about camera. Since going to digital several years ago, my favorite camera is the ARRI Alexa. You know, many will ask why. To me, I tend to not be as technical as other cinematographers. I have nothing against that. I just am not as interested as many. I know that probably sounds horrible. I'm a little more interested in what I do with light and how light tells a story and creates mood. I do love that the Alexa is very filmic to me. It has a color rendition that is very reminiscent of film. I think skin tones, which is an important thing. You and I were talking about that just earlier. You know, skin tone is an important factor. And I think Alexa does a nice job of reproducing proper skin tones. I think the latitude or its exposure range is really great. I think it's a very user-friendly camera in that I've put it through. I've been in, you know, very cold and very hot, and they've performed wonderfully. So I think it's just a solid camera that does with digital what the cameras I used to use with film did, to the best of its ability. They're very different mediums, but I think the Alexa's it's made that difference less dramatic for me. And I know others feel that same way. I've spoken, going back to what we've talked about, other cinematographers that at first were like, I'm never going to go digital. And then now they're Alexa fans because it's like, oh, I love that I can do this and this. And there's more range of information that's being captured. So in post, there's a little bit more flexibility within reason to adjust and modulate in final telecine or a digital intermediate, to where you can do some things that, you know, there's a little bit more room to play there. So there's a lot of advantages. When it comes to tricks, I mean, you know, there's a million. I'm trying to think of something that's specific to. Do you mean tricks in terms of technical tricks?
Yeah, some technical tricks that you've discovered. And now
Yeah.
share some secrets that you said everybody has and wants to share about.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great. I mean, I'm a big fan of soft light, and I had an interesting little story. We were bouncing into, I think it was on Glee. We were bouncing into white felt because I liked the soft quality that it gave. And I did a project, Crossbones, down in Puerto Rico. And I was able to bring my key grip with me, and we had a local best boy, and we gave him some of our felt. And we said, we're looking for this in big sheets of it. And he said, oh, there's all kinds of textiles down here. And, you know, there's a whole district, and I'll go. And yeah. And he went and was gone a couple hours, and he came back, and he had all these things that were not at all what we had given him. And I don't know if this was a language issue. He was a lovely guy, but they were all very sort of specular. They didn't have a soft texture to them. They had a very shiny texture. If you were to bounce light off of them, the light would come back with a hardness that I don't like. And my key grip and I were kind of looking at each other like, I don't think he quite understood. And then he said, well, there's one other thing that I saw I thought was interesting. And he pulled out, and it was basically like white insulation, if you can think of it, a very fibrous, we don't even know what it was. And in fact, I actually said, what is this? And he said, I don't know, but they had rolls of it. And I turned to my key grip and I said, could you mount it on something? And he said, sure, we'll just glue it to something. And so we used this weird material to light through, and it was incredibly soft and it was very warm. And this was on a project called Crossbones, where it was a pirate thing. So it was a period project. And so we only had firelight, moonlight, and daylight. And for the firelight sequences or candles, it really replicated that quality of candle really well. And so that was a little trick that now has traveled with me, in that I've gone to different countries even, and I've brought little swatches and said, we're looking for something like this. And sometimes people are like, oh, no problem. Other times people are like, what is this? I'm like, I don't know. But you can bounce into it, or you can direct light through it, and it's just a gorgeous quality. Wow. And people call them now Baffa clouds. And I just left Utah, where I was doing the Disney Plus series High School Musical. My key grip just emailed me and said, are we sending you the clouds? Are those waiting for a tentative season 3 pickup? What are we doing with the clouds? And my response was, let me see what I'm doing next. I might have you send them from Utah to wherever, or maybe come here and be in my garage, or maybe they stay there. I don't know. But they've kind of traveled, and the fun thing is that everybody's version of whatever this stuff was is different. Yeah. In South Africa, in Ireland, it's always this different. Puerto Rico was different. All the places that I've been to and wanted to recreate this cloud has been this unique sort of journey. But I find that it's been a huge time saver. I don't have to do a lot of flagging because it's so soft. It just comes off and has this beautiful quality. So that's probably my favorite trick, because that's changed the way I light. I've done projects where I didn't have my clouds and I was frustrated. And how do I get back that quality that the clouds had? How can I get one sent here? Will it reach here in time even? And then there are all kinds of, there's all kinds of tricks, but I'll try and think maybe we come back to this, because that was one that stumped me. It's not that I don't want to say, I just, there's nothing that is coming to my mind that's like impressive or like, wow, nobody's ever thought of it.
I think that was impressive.
Okay, great. Then that works. That works.
Do you utilize the new CRL technology, and how has it impacted your lighting?
I have not had a chance. I'm very intrigued by the notion of it. I'm a big fan of Christian Berger, who was somebody who was very instrumental in its creation. His work is stunning. I love the principles that the system is striving for, the beauty of natural light, and trying to find ways of sort of recreating that. But I just have not had a project that I tend to, and my wife and my agent both will tell you that this is true. I tend to not be very open to too many new things because I get very overwhelmed, which goes against the answer that we were just talking about of genre, and that you sort of have to be, able to ebb and flow with new technology. For me, that can be challenging because, again, I'm still trying to figure out how to become a better DP, in the sense that I want my work to be more integrated to story or more relevant, or these are things I'm still interested in exploring. So I'm not one of those people that's necessarily looking into new equipment. There are certain things that I like. I guess the way to put it is, there are so many things that are new to me each day anyway. I do have a part of my personality that likes to rely on things that I know, so I can take that off my plate. I think if there was a project that, as I was reading it, going back to the prep question, and some of the things with this new technology, I felt myself reflecting on, that might be the one to say, okay, now this is the project to integrate that. Mm-hmm. But for me, I tend to, when it comes to lighting, how I light is something that I feel comfortable with. In terms of the gear, I guess I should say the gear I use, I feel comfortable with. It's how I'm lighting a new project that is more of an interest to me. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a very interesting piece of equipment. And I think it's something that I would like to get to at some point. I just haven't had the opportunity. Mm-hmm. But I think it's pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Are you being pushed to do more virtual studio work similar to what they're doing with The Mandalorian?
Again, on the projects that I've been on, I have not so much. I know that that's coming. It's talked about a lot more. I think that it's a really great step forward in technology. And I'll give a very brief reason why. I mean, most of the time in the visual effects heavy things like Krypton that I've done, we have a green screen outside of a window, let's say, because we're on a different planet and everything outside the window doesn't exist. And so the green screen will be there and the visual effects people will composite in the city that's beyond or what have you. The problem with that is there's a cost connected. And so there'll be many discussions depending on the budget of a project of, well, if we're going to see that window a lot, is that the right way to go? Mm-hmm. What this new technology allows is the freedom to have these giant screens simply be what they are in terms of the images that are put up there. Once you have it up there and you've paid for the system from a budgetary perspective, you're able to photograph that window as many times as you want. The way The Mandalorian uses it is even more revolutionary in the sense that they're doing exteriors inside with full control, and they're able to project these beautiful landscapes that they can go shoot or they can create, you know, in a virtual world. So they can be extraterrestrial in nature in terms of other planets. And, but there's not this chasing the sun. The sun went behind a cloud. Okay, there's some rain coming in. Everybody take cover for 20 minutes. You have total control. And I think that's a good thing. There's something to be said for being out in the real world, but if you're dealing with an expensive production, they're not, most of the people that are controlling the money, in my feeling, aren't as interested in that. They're more interested in control. And I don't know that that's a bad thing. And so these new systems are providing a sense of control. They're using it more for car work, car driving shots, instead of taking the whole circus out. And, you know, that was one of the funnest things. The first time I did process car work, you know, I had seen cars drive by when I was a kid that were up on the platforms and the, you know, the cars being towed and the light and the camera and the actor, you know, not driving. And, you know, that's one of the sort of iconographic symbols of production that I couldn't wait to do. And the first time I did it, I felt like I was a little boy again. And almost now every time, to be honest with you, because especially when the police stop traffic, so you can do this giant U-turn on a big highway or something, and all the people have to wait, and then they're looking, is that Brad Pitt behind the wheel, or, you know, but there is a lot of logistics that goes hand in hand with that. There are a lot of logistics, and whether, you know, are you in sun for the first half and then you go back to base camp and change camera positions and suddenly it becomes really cloudy, you know, there's these things. Whereas if you can control what your daytime is and you have no limits, then you can take more time to shoot a scene if that's what you want to do, or you can have less time because you have everything you need. And, you know, so in answer to the question, no, I have not dealt with it firsthand, but I know that it's come up several times in ways that The Mandalorian's doing it as a replacement for green screen, but also in terms of driving things, driving scenes. I know I had a friend that worked on a show that was a science fiction as well. And they were building a big spaceship, and they were talking about a massive green screen. And they ran into the same problem that we were running into, that they didn't want to have all these VFX costs. And so they invested in one of these screens, and it had these images of space and I think a planet and some other elements to it. But whether they saw the window or not was no longer a cost concern. And that kind of liberation, that freedom, is really interesting. And he also said too, the interactive light, the screen was so bright that the little planet that was glowing out there, he could see it had really polished floors on the set. He could see reflections of the planet on the floor and things, you know, that would be difficult with visual effects. So there's pros and cons to everything. I'm excited to work with this technology. I think it's one of the things that goes against what I just said, that I tend to be a little hesitant with things that are too new. This to me seems like it's new in the right ways, and that it's just offering more control. And I think our work can be better. And I say that with the caveat that there's nothing better than being really outside when the sun is in the perfect spot, or it comes out of a cloud and there's little beams of light. You know, those moments of God light, you know, are spectacular. But for each one of those moments, I've probably had a million moments where I was standing there with 200 people in a field going, yeah, it should be any second. Clouds look like they're moving, and everybody's looking at you with burning holes in the back of your head. No, thank you. If I can be on the Mandalorian set saying, we're ready to go, that's wonderful.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
What kind of stressful situations have you encountered, and how did you deal with them? I'm sure there are many on set, but what are some of the most memorable ones that you really effectively dealt with and can now say, oh, ta-da, here's how you do it?
There are a number of stressful situations. I think the stress most likely, or most often rather, comes from things we've hit on previously, in that you come in with a certain passion and a certain idea, and oftentimes with an artistic plan, and there's going to be things that just impede that. And time is one of the big ones. There's, you know, I don't think I've ever been on, or certainly not in years, a project where someone said, we have all the time in the world and you can spend as much money as you need to. That just doesn't exist. It would be lovely, but it doesn't exist. So you already are limited in terms of those parameters. Those two are the biggies. And so stressful situations arise from that, in that, as I was alluding to earlier, you might have this idea and you're looking at the thing and saying, wow, I can't do that. Or somebody saying, hey, we're going to lose this minor in an hour and a half. Are you almost lit? How are you doing? And that can be very stressful, because there's a very real world constraint on what you would like to be just creative. But going back to the earlier analogy, if you really want to be just creative, do that oil painting in your living room, because you have to be able to translate your creativity to a group of people. First of all, you have to have the equipment necessary and the time, and you have to have everybody behind it. And those don't always add up. Whenever they don't, it results in stress. So the better, or the more, I think, to me, more important part of your great question is, how do you deal with that? I think it's not to internalize it, which I say because I'm a master at internalizing it. And so I know that that's oftentimes ineffectual. And that's where I get too sensitive and I feel bad, or I let somebody down, or if I'd planned it better, I could have been able to do it. Those things may be true. 9 times out of 10, they're not. You just don't have time. Might be that a scene took longer. Might be that an actor or actress was late, and so the day got started late, and you're just behind. It just happens. And so there will be people saying, what do you think? Can we get through this next thing quickly? You know, and that's an automatic stressor. It might be a relationship, and same thing. You've got to try and, let's say a director gets upset. You've got to stop and say, okay, they're just under pressure, you know, themselves. I don't think they really meant what they just said. They're not mad at me. They're just upset. It might be an actress. I was trying to do a shot, and I won't name names because she's amazing, but Academy Award nominated, you know, big movie star. And we were trying to do a certain focus pull from her profile to another actor. And the director kept saying, how come we're not pulling focus? And my focus puller was very good, and he wasn't going to the other actor because he was blocked. The actress kept stepping off her mark too far forward. So I tried to say something, and she got very upset. She said, you know, it's not about that. I'm doing things here. I'm acting, and you know, it's not about your focus pull. And I said, oh, okay. And she was, you know, somebody I really admired. I said, okay. And went over to the director and said, I don't think this shot's going to happen. And okay. And then something happened where we had a small break. We were shooting in a hotel room in Hollywood, and not a very pleasant location. It was meant to be a dive hotel. And I stepped out. I think I got a cup of coffee at craft services, and I came back, and she was sitting on the bed, and she kind of patted the bed and said, come over. And I went, oh my God, I'm going to get yelled at again. And she apologized and said, you know what? I was totally wrong. You're trying to do something. Your contribution is just as important, because we're not doing a play, we're doing a film. So the director of photography, to the things we've discussed, has tremendous creative influence. She was very complimentary of the work that she had seen on the film. She said, your contribution to this project is immense, and said very nice things. And I think genuinely felt bad and said, what do you need me to do to get the shot? And we explained it to her, and she nailed it.
Wow.
But that was very stressful, because I didn't feel I was in the wrong. I felt like we were not being disrespectful to her process. We were trying to do something that was telling a story with photography, which is not only my job, it's my obligation to the project.
Yeah.
And her response was not what I was expecting. And I didn't know how to handle that. And so I tried to follow my own advice, where I said, she's not upset at you. You guys have a great relationship. It's been a lovely film.
Yeah. And
just, we're not going to do this particular element, and that's not the end of the world. And I kind of talked myself off the proverbial ledge. This was a point in my career where I'd gotten better at doing that. And I just sort of took myself out of it a little bit and said, this isn't about you, so don't sweat it. That's the key here, is these things are going to happen. It might be, as I said, the AD going, we're really running long, guys, we got to go. Might be a director who's a little snippy. Okay, I'm just saying, do you want to do this? Because you talked about doing that. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, I'm just reminding you that was something we talked about. And not internalizing it. Because the stress you're not going to be able to avoid. I don't know that I've ever, going back to what I said earlier about visiting sets or visiting friends of mine, and I don't know that I've ever gone to a set and seen just an complete absence of stress. One of the goals on any set that I'm on is to immediately try and keep it as minimal as possible. I think, as we discussed, that is part of the role of the director of photography. But I've never been in a stressless set, because there's always going to be something. It's just, there's too many people trying to do too many creative things with non-creative, opponents attacking them, that there's going to be stress. So the thrust then becomes, for the young cinematographers watching, learn how to control that and not make it about you, and not have it be something that rocks your whole day. In the example of this actress in the hotel room, she did this lovely apology. She could have easily not, and I had to do a whole rest of the night with her. So I can't then start putting up walls or boundaries that she's starting to feel. Hey, wow, I got a lot of attitude from the DP. I didn't appreciate it. You can't do that, not of somebody of her stature, and really not to anyone, even a first-time actor. You should make them feel warm and welcome. And so it's really about how it's navigated. It's not about avoiding it because you can. It's more about, how do I survive it? How do I persevere through it? Sometimes, how do I use it? Okay, I don't have time because we overshot the last scene or whatever, or that actor was late. We're way behind. I've got to come up with something quick. Sometimes that can be really impactful. It can be, okay, I know what I was planning on doing. I don't have time for any of that. So what if I just did this? And people go, oh, that's interesting. Let's try it. And you do it and it works. And you go, wow. It's, I had 20 lights planned. This is one light. And we bounced it into a wall and it did everything. We're done. We're ready. And then you're the hero. And the director said, oh my God, we're going to make the day. And the AD says, oh, that was amazing. You did that in like 4 minutes. And that can be great too. So it's being able to survive it in the worst case, and maybe even use it a little in the best case. find a way for the negatives to be, they may not be a positive, but they might be something that pushes you out of that comfort zone to where you find something amazing. I remember having a shot that I was doing, and I had other plans, and the director is somebody that I've worked with a lot. Oh, it was Darren, who you had on, Darren Sarafian, who I owe a lot to because he's really good at pulling me out of my comfort zone. And I was doing a shot, and I just kept looking at it, and I thought, Darren's going to come in. I think he had gone to talk to the producers or something, but I said, Darren's going to come in any minute and say, this looks great, let's go. And so I went to the AD and I said, can Darren come in? And he said, okay, he's at Video Village. I said, no, have him come to my monitor in my little tent, you know, which has the pristine image. And I said, you know, I had plans, but what do you think? And he looked at it in classic Darren. He goes, I don't want to be disrespectful to your plans because your work is great, but I don't know what else you would do to this. And I said, I agree. I thought you would say that. Let's bring him in. It was a moment of using Darren, which at times would come up and say, I know, you know, I want to go. And I'd go, no, I want to do this and this and this. And he'd go, it doesn't need it. And I'd get upset. And then I'd look at it later and go, God, he was right. It didn't need that. Why was I obsessing on that when we had done all these good things? And so I think trying to get through it, and even better, trying to make it something that you can learn from, or you can, like I said, it's never bad to be the hero that saves the day. You know, instead of facing 3 hours of overtime, you're now going to make the day on time. That's never horrible. And so I think, to wrap up, it's not the avoidance of the stressful, it's the survival of the stressful. That's the key.
Thank you. That's very realistic view on this, though. Thank you.
I hope. I try.
What are the 3 key pieces of advice, or 3 lessons learned, or 3 mistakes to avoid that you can now share with those at the beginning of the path?
I think the key to all of it, and I know we've talked a lot about this, but I'm going to mention it again, is communication. If you are not a good communicator in both ways that I've described it, expressing your thoughts and ideas, but also being open to receiving the thoughts and ideas of others, having a sense of contribution and collaboration, being able to understand that somebody else's idea might be better than yours and to not be intimidated by that. Not to be the negative force, as we discussed earlier. Definitely, and this goes directly back to a notion you said that I really agree with, you know, the barometer of the atmosphere on a set starts from the top, without question. And as a director of photography, you're part of the top, and that can be wonderfully fun, but it's also a lot of pressure. And yet, if you can understand your role and try and get out from underneath the weight of it, it's an opportunity to make a difference. So in other words, you could look at it and say, okay, according to Maria and Chris, I carry a lot of weight, and so the tone of the set is my responsibility. Yes, but also, wait a minute, the tone of the set is my responsibility. So I can help make it better. As opposed to a world where, well, the tone of the set is based on Mr. Smith over in the tower, who we never see, and so we don't know what the tone is. Or Mr. Smith, who comes to set every morning and sits in a chair and is a real grouch and brings everybody down. No, you have the opportunity to affect how things are going to happen and what that tone is like. And so don't be afraid of that power. Use that power and make it a better place. Make it a fun environment. Make it a positive environment. I think those are the key things. And then the biggest thing that I want to add goes back to something I mentioned that I really feel passionate about, because I've struggled with it myself, is try not to be too sensitive. Try not to be too in your own head so much that something someone says or does, you know, sends you spiraling. Director gets a little upset you know, okay, they're under a lot of pressure. The crew doesn't understand. I had a director I used to work with would throw headsets a lot. And then one time, I think it really affected him. A sound guy came up and said, so we're down to only 2 working headsets. So might I recommend maybe throwing your script? And this director just laughed. He didn't know what else to do. He was like, I'm so sorry. And I saw in that moment, he never threw not in the times I worked with him, he never threw another headset. So you've got to be able to control those moments of, I think I'm failing. This looks horrible. I have no talent. I have no right to be shooting this project. All the self-doubt that's going to come with the stress we've talked about, with the power we've talked about. You got to try and let that go and say, no, I do have talent. This is a particularly difficult shot, or because of the time, I wasn't able to do what I wanted it to be. So it's not going to be my favorite shot in the world, but that doesn't mean I should be sent home. That's been a real struggle. And to anyone that's listening, try and wrap your heads around that now, because it can be a problem. People don't want to have somebody that they don't feel they can be honest with and say, you know what, you sort of overreacted when I didn't like your idea. Don't be that person. Be the person that says, okay, bummer. I thought it was a good idea, but okay. Mm-hmm. They're the director. You're working for them. Or it might be a producer saying, I loved your idea. We don't have it in the budget. The things you need to do to pull it off, we just don't have it. He's not saying you're horrible. He's saying he or she's saying we don't have those resources. So don't beat yourself up. There's plenty of chances to do that in what we do. And there's plenty of people that will do that for you. Don't do it to yourself. And I mean that sincerely. There'll be critics when a project's done. There'll be people that maybe, you know, I had a project that I was up for recently that I didn't get, and it rocked my world. And my agent said, you know what, I was going to wear a green shirt to work today. And you know what, I chose a blue one. Did I reject the green shirt? I said, no. He goes, well, then why are you viewing this as rejection? And I said, well, isn't it? And he said, no, they chose somebody else. Who knows why? More importantly, there's nothing you could have done. Were you mean in the interview? I said, no, I thought I was charming. I thought I said good things, and they already liked your work, or you wouldn't have been in the meet. And he was just able to readjust me in a way that was like, somebody else said something better, or there was something in their work going back to that they tied in on that they wanted to maybe integrate into their project. It just happens. Yeah. So that's the biggest piece of advice, is to don't take yourself too seriously. Take your work seriously, be prepared, know your craft, know your tools, know your director, know what he or she wants, know that he or she likes to hear ideas, or that they don't, or maybe they'd like to hear them the day before, yeah, or they don't like to be hit with stuff right in the middle. Or I worked with a director recently that would speak to me during the rehearsals. And I finally said, you know, I'm sorry, can we let him finish and then we'll talk? And the director was very nice and said, oh yeah, sure. But that to me was odd. It's like they're out there talking, and it wasn't just a whisper. It was a lot of times, we can be here and then we can go over there and we'll do a 2-shot. And it was like, but they're talking, they're emoting out there. They were fine with it. I was a little uneasy. I also felt comfortable enough that I could say what I said. So you want them to feel the same way about you. You want them to feel comfortable to come to you, to have an issue, to say no to an idea, and you don't want to go off and cry into a corner. Yeah. And I think that's the key. I think that's the key. Be serious about your work, less serious about yourself.
Thank you. Christopher, it has been amazing. I personally learned so much. So it has been amazing for me personally to learn so much about this side of the industry. And you're the first director of photography who joined our series. So wow. Thank you very much. Yes. Wow. And like I said, I'm personally a big fan. And I am really delighted that you shared so many technical things about this world and answered so many of the submitted questions from those who aspire to be like you. And hopefully got a little push in that direction today.
I hope.
So thank you very much. And to wrap up this amazing masterclass, whom would you like to nominate to also send the elevator back down and help others make it in this world?
Well, first, let me thank you. It's been an absolute joy. I think you're amazing, and it's been a delight to have this opportunity to chat. So thank you again. It's an honor. Thanks to everybody who sent in a question. The questions were amazing. So I really appreciate that. I think I'm gonna aim high and nominate Tom Hanks. And that may seem like an obvious choice, but there's a reason why. I've not worked with Tom Hanks. In that moment when I went to visit Philippe Rousselot that I told you about on Larry Crown, the Tom Hanks film, there was a moment where there was a very big lighting setup, and Mr. Hanks said, "You want to have a seat in this patio set?" And as it turned out, I was able to sit and chat with Tom Hanks for about a half hour. And it was probably one of the most remarkable moments in my career, if not my life. What an amazing human being.
Wow.
And just the insights, the artistic references, the interests he holds. And then for the people that I do know that have worked with him, just the way that he presents himself as an icon, but also as an artist, I think is just the pinnacle of where we all should be aiming.
Wow.
There's a decency there, and watching him on his own set, talk about a calm, secure environment. That was the one set I would say there was no stress on.
Wow.
Because it all stemmed from him and the elegance of Mr. Rousselot. Just a creative, calm, everybody talked to each other. There was no tension. But that all came from him as director, writer, producer. And he really taught me about, he's not just somebody that pretends to be that person. He is that person. And I think if the industry as a whole could move in a Tom Hanks direction, we'd not only be a better industry, we'd be a better world.
Wow. This is
so
powerful.
Yeah, I think if you could get him and he could come, I think the wealth that people could disseminate from his just kindness, and certainly he's a master actor. So all the actors out there would have, quite a master class.
Sure.
But I think just as anybody in the industry, if we can hold Tom Hanks up, in my humble opinion, as the goal, then we're going to be just a nicer place to be, and we're going to do better projects because everybody's going to be happier.
Wow, thank you. This was so moving. And frankly, these series really are about kindness, because everybody who participates are volunteers, just willing to give back and help those at the beginning of their path. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful meeting you, and the nomination is amazing. He is immensely talented, and I'm beyond excited to hear that he is also such a wonderful person.
Incredible.
With such an impact. So thank you very much, Christopher.
Thank you.
Yes, it's been an honor. And to everybody who's been watching, we wish you best of luck, and we hope to see your films and TV shows on major streaming platforms and big screens very soon. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.